We begin with a Fox News alert. Major news in the sexual harassment scandal rocking Capitol Hill right now. Embattled Democratic Senator Al Franken is out. In a few weeks, he says he will be gone, announcing he's resigning, as at least 8 women have now accused him of sexual misconduct. And amid a growing chorus of dozens of Senate Democrats who have called on that Minnesota senator to step down. But the senator took a final parting shot at President Trump and the GOP during his resignation speech on the floor a short time ago. Watch.
Today, I am announcing that in the coming weeks, I will be resigning as a member of the United States Senate. I, of all people, am aware that there is some irony in the fact that I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party.
We'll get to reaction on that in moments away, but there are some other developments, big ones on Capitol Hill unfolding right now. On the hot seat, the head of the FBI being grilled over allegations of bias against President Trump. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. FBI Chief Christopher Wray is getting questions from Republicans and amid claims from Republicans that the agency harbors an anti-Trump bias. This after an agent was canned from the Russia investigation after his text messages critical of the president were revealed. That same agent also was a key player in the investigation into Hillary Clinton's secret email server. Earlier, Director Wray answered a range of questions from whether the FBI applied a double standard in favor of Hillary Clinton to the president's recent criticism that the Bureau is, quote, in tatters.
I leave it to others to conclude whether extremely careless and gross negligence are the same thing. But I will say that the particulars of the investigation and the decisions that were made and whether or not it was handled appropriately is, as I think it should be, the subject of an outside independent investigation by the Inspector General. I have never been asked by the President to take any kind of loyalty oath. My loyalty is to the Constitution. The FBI that I see is tens of thousands of brave men and women who are working as hard as they can to keep people that they will never know safe from harm.
Our own Catherine Herridge is following it all from gavel to gavel, and she joins us now from Capitol Hill. Catherine?
Well, thanks, Harris. We're entering the 4th hour of this rare public testimony by FBI Director Christopher Wray, and he's taken questions, multiple questions this morning about this weekend tweet from President Trump, where he said the FBI was in tattered after the 3-year tenure of FBI Director James Comey, who he fired in May. But in his response, it's important to note that Director Wray acknowledged the recent controversy over this FBI agent Peter Strzok, his 10,000 text messages, some of which showed an anti-Trump bias. Let's listen.
The FBI that I see is tens of thousands of brave men and women who are working as hard as they can to keep people that they will never know safe from harm. Do we make mistakes? You bet we make mistakes, just like everybody who's human makes mistakes. And when that independent fact-finding is complete, we will hold our folks accountable if that's appropriate.
Here's the thing. Agent Peter Strzok is really at the center not only of the key milestones in the Clinton email investigation, but he then last July pivoted to the Russia collusion investigation, and he is emerging as a key player in that probe as well. Earlier today, we heard from the committee leadership, the Republican chairman and the ranking Democrat, and you can see here in this section how it divided along very partisan lines.
It is absolutely unacceptable for FBI employees to permit their own political predilections to contaminate any investigation. Even the appearance of impropriety will devastate the FBI's reputation.
I predict that these attacks on the FBI will grow louder and more brazen as the special counsel does his work and the walls close in around the president and evidence of his obstruction and other misdeeds becomes more apparent.
The Justice Department's independent internal watchdog, the Inspector General, has been doing an internal investigation there for the better part of a year, looking at how the Clinton email case was handled and specifically the actions of then FBI Director James Comey recommending against criminal charges, as well as his boss, the Attorney General Loretta Lynch. What the FBI director said today is that he will take no further action until that report is complete. Let's listen.
Inspector General is looking at the very important question of whether or not improper political considerations factored into the decision making. If he were to conclude that that's what happened, then I think at that point we're in a situation where we have to assess what else might need to be done to unring that bell.
It's important to note here is that an IG investigation really typically has some kind of administrative action at the end if there's a negative finding against an employee. But in this case, almost all of the key players are already out of government. That's why Wray was pressed so many times about whether there was a need for a special counsel to do another review of the Clinton email matter. Harris.
Catherine, thank you very much for teeing it up for us with the facts. Our next guest has his own questions for Director Wray. He's actually stepped out of that hearing so he can talk with us. Republican Andy Biggs of Arizona sits on the House Judiciary Committee and has taken a break from the hearings to join us now. Congressman, I want to first start with, we learned and we knew that he'd only been on the job for 4.5 months. But I'm curious to know what Americans should be watching for in this end and really what the goal is having him on the Hill today.
Well, I think we should be watching for the way he answers the questions. Is he going to continue to divert to the IG or assert some kind of privilege? He specifically said he wasn't asserting any privilege, but he keeps referring everything to the Inspector General's investigation. And the key thing is, you heard over and over this morning as well, Congress has oversight. We're entitled to know whether you used the Fusion dossier to get FISA warrants to spy on Americans, particularly in the Trump campaign. These are very important, and we want to make sure he's not diverting attention, and we want him to be cooperative. The other aspect is, since we do have oversight, we want to know why is he delaying and dragging feet in producing the evidence that we've requested in Congress.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you have not had a chance yet to ask your questions, but some of those have been addressed. I have the letter that you sent along with Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida and Louis Gohmert of Texas. You had specific questions, and you just hit on one of the key ones with the dossier. Specifically, I understand, you sent this so they would have your questions already in front of them. And you want to know if the FBI actually had any money flowing for that anti-Trump dossier.
Absolutely right. It has been reported that after the DNC paid for it and the Hillary Clinton campaign paid for that dossier, that it was given to the FBI, and the FBI used some funds, from federal funds, to help pay for some of the expenses, turned it into a federal document, and then used that to get a federal FISA warrant to spy on the Americans. We want to know if they helped pay for it, and what was the role of the FBI. We've received no answer to the letter yet. I'm hopeful that maybe we can get an answer. I'm not real hopeful, I should say, because I think he's going to divert it to the Inspector General again, but we are pushing on that issue because it's important.
Well, and I've heard you from watching this morning, and I want to point out, by the way, Representative Gaetz is actually questioning right now, so I know soon you will be up and you'll be able to follow through. But I heard on the idea of that evidence that you're waiting to see, that you feel like the FBI director is dragging his feet on, to put it in your words, that actually you have every right to see that. And there's not much, I mean, they can redact a little bit, but there's not much really that they can change, particularly with regard to the FISA requests that were made. I want to move on to another question that I thought was so interesting in your letter. Can you please define, and you would ask Christopher Wray this, the FBI director, the meaning of the word special as it pertained to their Hillary Clinton email investigation? Why is that important?
Well, but what happened here is they pulled this investigation back in-house to a small group. They said it's special, that it's going to be somehow unique. And they've had a small special team doing this instead of a normal investigation. So we wanted to define that. Tell us what in the world they were thinking at the time. Now Christopher Wray probably can't give us full insight, but he can go back and find out the information why they did this, how they deemed that, and give it to us.
Representative Biggs, you know what popped into my head? Does special mean special treatment? And the only reason I ask that is because we're finding out about that anti-Trump bias via this person who sent those anti-Trump text messages. By the way, we also learned today, and do you think you'll ask about this too? There's no discipline for that employee yet. They moved him over, this Peter Strzok, but there's no discipline. Do we anticipate that there would be?
That's a great question. That's one of the ones I want to get to. I actually highlighted that when the director said this was basically, he said this was not a disciplinary move.
Well, what
so what does it mean? Is that a lateral move then? Is it everything the same? And why did he not get a disciplinary move? Because you don't just move him on the basis of no reason to this lateral position where you're not investigating, you're not participating in any of the normal FBI agents' functions. That's a great question. I highlighted it. I think you're exactly right. That's one we want to attack as well.
You know, can I also ask about the president weighing in on the situation, calling the FBI in tatters? You know, as the American public watches, you know, we've been telling them of the 36,000 employees that exist at the FBI, and we're only talking about a few of them. They may be assigned to some very important investigations, but it is not in total the FBI. Does that kind of thing help illuminate, or is it just kind of, you know, on the sidelines from the president? How do you treat that going into a hearing like this?
Well, I just put it on the sideline. I think he's accurate, though, that the reputation, not of the whole FBI in and of itself, but of the higher level executives that are kind of involved in all of these political discussions, their reputation is in tatters, and it draws down on the entire agency. Are we seeing blind lady justice, or are we seeing political favors, special treatment, and does that denigrate the very reason for America's rule of law idea? This very idea that some people are treated specially. That is a huge problem, and I think that the only thing I saw here was that the Democrats kept hitting that over, and I think it's a red herring. What we really want to get to is actually what happened in these investigations, and that gets to the idea of politicization and special treatment.
Sure. I understand now, as you put it, that the word special can have a different context in all of this, and Americans get it. Special treatment is something that should not happen in any of the government agencies that we're talking about, but particularly the FBI. I have to let you get back in because one of the gentlemen you wrote that letter with is about to wrap up. From the great state of Arizona, if you will, Congressman Andy Biggs stepping away from that important hearing with the FBI director to talk with Overtime. Thank you.
Thanks, Harris. Appreciate it.
And what is the political impact from today's hearings? And can we expect Republicans to keep the heat on the FBI? Let's bring in anchor of Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace. Chris, always good to see you. What popped out so far in the testimony today with regard to Christopher Wray?
Not much, and I think you could get that from your interview with Congressman Biggs. Frustration, because a lot of the questions they're asking about Peter Strzok, about various things that have happened in the Trump investigation and the Hillary Clinton investigation, Christopher Wray has said, well, that's all part of the investigation by the Inspector General, the internal watchdog at the Justice Department. We also need to point out, Christopher Wray is not an appointee of the Obama administration. He's an appointee of Donald Trump. So there's very little reason to think he's trying to protect Hillary Clinton in any of this. He's decided, and you could argue rightly so, that this is a matter for the internal investigation. And that's sometimes what happens when you get that kind of an IG taking something to look at, then someone like Christopher Wray, the FBI director, can't talk about it.
Yeah, you know, you point this out. He's only been on the job for 4.5 months. So I think people can figure out that, yes, it was President Trump. But when you see a tweet from the president, that's a call out, I would imagine. And we know just a few hours later that Christopher Wray tried to boost the morale of his troops, if you will, by sending out that memo that says, the president, everybody has every right to question what we do because our job is so important. I'm paraphrasing it now. But kind of looking at this overarching, if you will, what is the process here getting at today? As Americans watch, what's the takeaway for them?
I don't think there is much takeaway. Obviously, Republicans are trying to build a case that Hillary Clinton was treated, as you say, in a special over-lenient way. I think that'll come as news to a lot of people in the Clinton campaign who blamed James Comey and the FBI for the fact that she lost the election.
Interesting.
It certainly was not particularly lenient when, 10, 11 days before the election, he announced that he was reopening the investigation because they had found these emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop from Uma Abedin. So, I mean, you know, there's a real argument as to whether or not the FBI bent over backwards to help Hillary Clinton. Conversely, in the case of Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who apparently had sent some emails that showed some anti-Trump bias, again, I think you have to wonder a little bit about whether or not there's an effort to go after President Trump, because as soon as he heard about this, which was last July, almost half a year ago, the special counsel, Robert Mueller, fired Peter Strzok from his investigation. He was given a desk job in human resources at the FBI. So certainly the special counsel doesn't sound like he was okay with this. Sounds like he was very upset at the idea that Peter Strzok was expressing anti-Trump sentiments in an email to another employee at the Justice Department.
You know, I want to press in with something that I've read about and get your point of view on it. You know, it has been reported that this was the same person, this Peter Strzok, who would have talked with and interviewed some key components, including Uma Abedin, and that some of the things she may have told him were not true. We do know from recently with General Flynn that when you lie to the FBI, that's breaking the law. Like, you can't do that. So if that's the case, removing Peter Strzok, would that make him out of the way so that the FBI can't be held accountable for those people who may not have told the truth to them? How does that work, Chris?
Well, I don't know exactly, because you're throwing something at me, but I wouldn't think that if he wouldn't be the one who was in jeopardy, it would be Uma Abedin, using your scenario, your hypothetical. And, you know, I assume he's not the only one who was looking at what was said. But in any case, I guess my point as to why I have a little skepticism about all this, James Comey, then the FBI director, was sufficiently concerned about these emails that he, 10 days, 11 days before the election, sends a note to Congress saying, we're reopening the investigation. I know a lot of people in the Clinton campaign think that's what beat her. It certainly was something that wasn't helpful to her. So why would they do that? And then on the other hand, they're covering up for Uma Abedin in the next 10 days. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense.
I hear you. I also question why, when the president fired James Comey, why Democrats were defending against that, saying that, no, the president can't do that. That's obstruction. We could talk all day and go back and forth, but right now on the Hill is the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, taking a whole lot of questions. And Chris Wallace, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
You bet.
Well, we are awaiting the start of the daily White House press briefing, and you can imagine all the different directions this can go. We expect to get the administration's reaction to today's testimony from FBI Director Christopher Wray, and reaction, if you will, to some of the comings and goings on Capitol Hill, not to mention Al Franken, a senator, Democrat from Minnesota, stepping down, resigning amid sexual allegations against him. 8 women now, the list is at least 8 women with accusations against him. A lot to ask Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, about today. We'll take that live in minutes as we expect it to begin this hour. Stay close to Overtime.
Let me be clear. I may be resigning my seat, but I am not giving up my voice. I will continue to stand up for the things I believe in as a citizen and as an activist. But Minnesotans deserve a senator who can focus with all her energy on addressing the challenges they face every day.
That was, of course, embattled Democratic Senator Al Franken of Minnesota announcing he'll soon be resigning from his Senate seat amid a growing number of sexual misconduct allegations. Dozens of Democratic senators, in just the last 24 hours, have called on him to step down, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who spoke with Franken personally yesterday. Let's bring in Tammy Bruce, conservative radio talk show host and Fox News contributor, and Liz Smith, former deputy campaign manager for 2016 Democratic presidential candidate Martin O'Malley. Great to see you both. Thank you for being here. This was a huge day, and Al Franken chose to do this on the Senate floor. I want to talk with you real quickly, Tammy, about why you say this doesn't bring an end for Democrats.
Well, it doesn't, because they think it may. They think with John Conyers being gone, this being done. By the way, what you say on the Senate floor, you can't be sued for. That's an important thing about what you say on a Senate floor versus somewhere else in another avenue. I don't know what's on Senator Franken's mind, but who knows? But this is, of course, if they think this is going to end the inquiries, they're wrong. We have that, what we call the shush fund. People haven't been discussing it. From 1995 to 2017, 17 million paid out. Your viewers will know that. Jackie Spear has found it involves 260 payouts and settlements. Now, that includes not just sexual harassment, but it could be a variety of discrimination. But we're now learning that, in fact, they may not have broken down what those claims are for internally. Another way, I think, to protect themselves, to keep it obviously not transparent. This is not going to go away. But they're also preparing for the election next Tuesday. They want to say the Democrats deal with this issue and the Republicans don't.
All right.
It's not going to work.
I want to get you to step in here, Liz, because this would then mean a shift strategy-wise for Democrats. And there are some spots where Republicans could get hit.
Yes. And look, I am glad that Al Franken finally decided to resign. I think he should have done it.
You think he decided?
Look,
I
think
that's how it worked out?
No, oh no, he had to be
because there were 8 women yesterday who had some things to say.
Girl, there were clearly fingernail marks on his desk, and he had to go earlier, and I think he should have gone earlier, and that it shouldn't have taken 7 women for us to finally believe them, because, you know, it's usually not just 7 women. If there's 7 women out there, there's probably a lot more.
Yeah.
So, but look, this is the reality, is that so far, Democrats are cleaning house. Conyers is gone. Franken is going. But you still have Republicans standing behind Roy Moore and Blake Farenthold, and I'd like to see Republicans, you know, showing the same leadership that Democrats are on this issue. And look, and I agree with you that we need to get to the bottom of that shush fund and understand that it's going to hit both parties equally. There are going to be Democrats in there. There are going to be Republicans.
I'll tell you who's moving to get to answers, though. Women on both sides of the aisle. True. Barbara Comstock leading. You mentioned Jackie Spear. But you also have Marsha Blackburn. You've got a bipartisan bill that she put forth that has to do with, you call it a shush fund. I call it a slush fund. It doesn't matter. It's taxpayer money.
I like
They want to know the enumeration of what's in that fund.
These
and what
women
was
have
put
been
out.
in Congress also for years, if not decades. So this has been in place since 1995, and only now it's
just
just
so few of these female voices.
Well,
in Congress.
This is also why should we be giving? I'd love also to hear more men. This is the other question. Men who are living within that same environment with men who are doing this, this is what we have to expect. Of course, as women, from our life experience, we're going to say we want better. It is the men in our lives, fortunately, which usually happens, the good men in that environment that should say enough is enough. Those are the people that need to step up. But I would argue that I don't think this will, in fact, hit Republicans, but I'm looking at probably more like a 70-30 framework. It's going to hit the Democrats more specifically because of how they handled the Clinton dynamic, saying that if you complained about this, you're a sexual McCarthyist. At least Republicans
let's stop for a second and talk about that, because I brought up Bill Clinton, and boy, the heat on Twitter was swift for me. People were like, well, how can you talk about that now? That's been 20 years, so on and so forth. Look, Kirsten Gillibrand talked about it. Talked about it. And she had a very strong relationship with the Clintons back in the early days of her politics. Women and the Democratic Party have to start to look at the legacy that left behind as well. And I know she was 20, but we're talking about people in powerful positions against people who are not in powerful positions.
Sure, and it is, look, we do have to come to terms with what happened during Clinton's administration, frankly.
So when you say as a Democrat you have to come to terms, what does that mean exactly? Do you guys have like a cocktail party and you talk about it? Or is
I wish. Or
are there some real answers coming?
No. I think that we need to say that, look, if this happened today, that he would have faced real ramifications.
You think he would have had to leave the White House?
Yeah, I think he might have had to. Yes, and look, I was 15 when this happened, so I can't say that I was out there on the front lines. You know, I was getting my news from my parents, from the news at the time. So I wasn't voting for him, but I I do think that he would be facing a very different set of circumstances today, given the cultural mores, and I think the Democratic Party would be a lot tougher on him.
I disagree. I was
last
on the front
quick
lines.
word.
I was on the front lines, and a lot of people, Republicans, said that behavior was unacceptable. Democrats were saying, including Democratic women and people like Gloria Steinem, were saying, leave him alone. They've created this environment. This is where the chickens have come home to roost. Wow. It is finally our generation, by the way, that is saying, you know what? We've had it. And this is now going to be the result. And the Democrats are going to be in particular trouble because they have supported this kind of environment for decades at this point. Republicans, at least to some degree, have said this is unacceptable behavior. And that's why you'll see fewer of them affected by this, but they will be drawn in to some degree.
Interesting conversation. And at the heart of it, you just hope that the women, that the reporting apparatus is put into place on Capitol Hill, as we have seen it in corporations across America and the other places that we well know that this is popped up. That's important.
It's going to have to come from outside. I don't think Congress can be trusted.
The focus off the women who've come forward.
Yeah.
Liz Smith, I'm a little bit jealous that you were 15 when all that was rolling out. I'm going to try not to take that too hard. Great to see you both, Tammy. Thank you very much. Fox News Alert, we are awaiting the White House press briefing right now, set to start a short time from now. We expect to hear about Senator Al Franken's resignation and the FBI director's House testimony on his agency's integrity at this point, as it was found out about those anti-Trump text messages from a key agency member. And later today at the White House, President Trump is set to sit down with congressional leaders. Remember, last time the Democrats canceled, including the two top Democrats who abruptly pulled out of last week's scheduled meeting. With a budget deadline this weekend, can they reach a compromise to avoid a government shutdown? Did I say it was a busy day? We'll talk with one Republican lawmaker. Stay close. Fox News Alert now. President Trump is getting set to host a high-stakes meeting at the White House with the clock clicking down to avoid a government shutdown. And the president to meet with congressional leaders and Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan, just saying just moments ago that he feels good about the prospects of avoiding a shutdown. That's a good sign, considering last week when the president sat between two empty chairs after two Democrats, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, pulled out of the meeting with him. Joining me now is Congresswoman Diane Black of Tennessee, chair of the House Budget Committee, and we want to go live to her to ask about where they are now with Democrats coming back to the table. Always great to see you. It might have been forecast that this was going to happen, but it was a moment of drama last week.
Well, this is so disappointing, Harris. We, over 80 days ago, completed our work here in the House by doing 12 appropriation bills, which would have funded the government. If the Senate would have taken this up and been dealing with this all along, we wouldn't be to this place at this time. This creates a lot of uncertainty, and especially in the military, which is not where we need to have uncertainty. The military need to know the dollars that are going to come for equipment and salaries and so on. And so this is very disappointing that we're at this point in time, but we are making progress, so that's a good thing.
Well, and there's some other big issues, too, that have been sticking points. The Dreamers, DACA, illegal immigration. Where are you on that? Because this is a lot to get done in the next few days. You hear, on the Senate side, the push to slow things down, if you will, and not make the date this weekend. You have so much to accomplish.
We do. We have a tremendous amount to accomplish, and it is our role and our job to take care of DACA. Appropriately so, the president said that he wanted Congress to address that issue, and we do need to address it. But I don't think we ought to address it in a haphazard or a very quick manner. I know they are doing hearings. I'm not on the committee of jurisdiction, but I know they are working on solutions there. I'm not sure this is the right time. We do have a little time, and we need to give it time. This is not the measure on which DACA needs to be put. This simply means keeping the government functioning and keeping our military strong.
It's so interesting the way you put that, because we need to remind people, as you've just said, that this is a situation that was open-ended for those Dreamers anyway. I mean, what you're trying to do is give them a firm footing, and what that can look like in a bipartisan matter as you talk more about it, you think needs more time. And so people need to take that into account as well. Let's talk a little bit about tax reform if we can. And I've heard the jubilant nature on the Hill from Republicans both in the House and Senate. And going forward in conference committee, is that jubilance still there?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, Harris, we are excited about the fact that tax reform has not been done in over 30 years. President Reagan was the last president where that tax reform was done. The code is very large, 10,000 pages, and like our former chairman said, larger than the Bible with no good news. And so we really want to be able to get this economy moving. We already see that there's some optimism because the markets are looking good, but we need to complete our job, give a jolt to the economy. And in Tennessee, it means another 18,000 jobs for my folks in Tennessee. In addition to that, about almost close to $2,000 additional dollars in their pocket in wages and increased wages. So this is a big deal.
Are you saying that about jobs because you think potentially these companies will come home because of lowering the corporate tax? That's where I hear you going there. I want to get one last question in before you have to scoot on the Hill, because I know it's a busy day. Okay. It has to do with where you come together in this situation. Can you explain it to me that you don't want a situation where you get everything thrown in because you're also talking about the spending bill into the tax conversation? How do you keep them separate? And what are the moves on Capitol Hill right now to make that happen? Is that the goal?
Yeah. It's not the first time that we have had more than one large measure taking place at the same time. And so fortunately, we're able to handle both the continuing resolution and also the tax reform at the same time. Look, I would, as I said before, like to be handling just tax reform now because that is what we thought, where we thought we would be at this particular point in time. Unfortunately, we're here with a CR as well.
So you say unfortunate because you've got so much to get done, again, to put the point on it.
Because we should have had this done in regular order by passing what we call appropriation bills that fund the government, and that is the way to do it. It's not to be, the continuing resolution just simply puts the money in the same slots that it has been in. The appropriation bills changes that and looks at what's needed now. What was done last year might not be what's needed this year. And so that's the reason why it's so important for us to do regular order and appropriation bills. They're done. They're ready for the Senate. Senate, get your job done.
I've heard you say that before. Now it's almost Christmas. Now you really mean it. Congresswoman Diane Black, always great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harris, for having me.
All right, so the seats are starting to fill up. We know that this is a big day at the White House. We're awaiting the press briefing here this hour, where we expect to hear more about the president's meeting with congressional leaders in tax reform. You just heard Congresswoman Diane Black talking about that. With Democrats now back at the table, we think there won't be two empty chairs where they're supposed to be sitting with the president now. Also, the world continues to react to the president's historic announcement from yesterday. You saw it here live on Overtime, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital with a plan to move our U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to the city of Jerusalem, with many countries now pushing back on that move. Talk in the Palestinian territory of 3 days of rage, even. We'll talk with Israel's ambassador to the United Nations live here on the program, as some countries in the UN Security Council are calling for an emergency meeting. Stay close. And breaking news inside the White House press briefing. It is underway. Sarah Sanders, White House press secretary. Let's watch.
Also, as you're aware, the president will meet later this afternoon with congressional leaders from both parties to discuss the need to fund the government, particularly our military and the Department of Veterans Affairs. The president and the Republicans in the House and Senate are eager to pass a bill fully funding the federal government and the military. With the threats we are facing, our national security should not be held hostage for irresponsible demands, and we certainly hope that won't happen. Now, with Christmas season in full swing, I want to shine a spotlight on some of the incredible stories of generosity and love that show what the Christmas spirit and the American spirit are all about. Today, I'd like to start with the story of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Wheeling, West Virginia. The story starts over 100 years ago when a young girl tragically died around the Christmas season, and her family donated money to the church in her honor and asked that the money be used for children at Christmas. What they may not have realized at the time was that this act of kindness in the midst of incredible heartache would bless countless children for the next century. To this day, St. Matthew's continues helping children and families during the Christmas season. They usually do it anonymously, but word of their generosity spread through social media this year. At the local Walmart, numerous families will come to pay the bill for Christmas toys they'd put on layaway and be told that there's no need because it's already been paid in full. There will be so many acts of generosity and kindness that go unnoticed this Christmas season, and that's okay. St. Matthew's Church wasn't looking for credit, and neither are so many others, but these stories are important because they remind us what this season is all about, and that's the greatest gift of all, that a Savior was born. hopefully we can all focus and take time out of our busy schedules to enjoy the Christmas season or however you may celebrate. And with that, I'll take your questions. Kevin.
Thank you, sir. I want to ask you about the possible government shutdown and the optimism that the president might have that he can avert a shutdown. And if I could follow up and ask about the California fires and the very latest that the White House has on them.
Sure. In terms of the government shutdown, look, we expect a clean CR to pass with Democrat support. That's what we hope will happen. Funding the government, particularly our military, our Veterans Affairs, are always important, but particularly now with so many threats that we face globally, this is certainly an important priority for the administration, and we hope something that will be discussed and agreed to later today. Jennifer.
On the fires, I'm sorry.
Sorry, on the fires, was there a specific question?
Yeah, is the White House in coordination with the folks out in California in battling that wildfire? Is there more money to be made available, especially for the areas near Los Angeles, which are under siege right now by so many devastating fires?
Absolutely. The administration is staying in regular contact. Both FEMA and folks here at the White House are speaking regularly to state and local authorities and making sure that we're ready and able to help when needed and when requested by those authorities. Jennifer?
Can you say a little bit about why John Bolton was here at the White House today, and also on taxes? We're a little confused on whether the White House would support a 22% corporate tax rate. You had the White House economist Kevin Hassett talking about saying it would be okay and it wouldn't undermine the economy. And then a few hours later, the legislative affairs director, Mark Short, said something about it needs to be 20. So can you say...
Look, our focus has been on getting the lowest corporate rate possible. 15 is better than 20, 20 is better than 22, and 22 is better than what we have. Again, we're going to continue to push, but we're not going to negotiate that from the podium, and we're committed to getting the lowest corporate rate we can. On John Bolton, he is here. He's a friend of the president, somebody who he wanted to visit with, nothing more than that, nothing more than a check-in and a friendly visit. John?
Sarah, Donald Trump Jr. refused to talk about his conversations with the president, citing attorney-client privilege. Would the president release him from any such privilege and allow him to speak to the committee?
That's a question you would have to ask his attorneys. We believe that his lawyers had a legitimate reason and basis for not answering those questions, but that's something I would direct you to his attorneys to address more fully.
Can you explain to me how it could be attorney-client privilege when neither Donald Trump Jr. nor President Trump are attorneys?
Again, that's something that you would have to talk with Don Jr.'s attorneys about. That's not something I'm going to be able to comment from here. Matthew?
Thanks, Sarah. Senator Franken today, in announcing his resignation, said, quote, that he's aware that there is some irony in the fact that I'm leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party, end quote. What's the White House response to that?
Look, the president addressed the comments back during the campaign. We feel strongly that the people of this country also addressed that when they elected Donald Trump to be president, and I've addressed it several times from here and don't have anything new to add.
Can you say anything more broadly about the differences in the way the two parties are handling these accusations of sexual misconduct?
I think that some of that would be left to some of the party leadership. I'm not sure if there's a specific question in there on the differences, but John?
Thank you, Sarah. Have any of the president's counterparts from around the world contacted the president, contacted the White House to indicate that they too will follow the president's lead in moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, or acknowledging that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel?
I'm not aware of any country's commitment to follow suit in this at this time.
Do you expect that to happen? Do you expect that others will follow the president's lead here?
I'm not aware of any countries that we anticipate that happening at any point soon. I'm not saying that they aren't, but I'm not aware of them. Jordan?
Thanks, Sarah. Last week, the president said that the U.S. would be imposing additional sanctions on North Korea today. Do you have an update on where that stands?
Yeah, we expect the Department of Treasury to put out more details on that, hopefully by the end of this week, and we'll keep you guys posted on that front. Jennifer?
Thanks, Sarah. What is the president's reaction to some U.S. allies, particularly in Europe, notably the United Kingdom, who have expressed opposition to his action recognizing Jerusalem? And also, does the fact that he kept his promise give him more credibility when negotiating in the Middle East?
Certainly, I think one of the abilities to follow through on something you've committed to, as the president has done. But also, let's not forget that this was something that Congress voted on starting back in 1995 and has reaffirmed 10 separate times over the last 20 years. This is something that the president took action on, a very courageous and bold action, and something that, frankly, the members of the United States Congress have voted on many times before.
Sarah.
Olivia?
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, yesterday you guys put out a statement under the president's name saying that he was directing other officials in the administration to reach out to Saudi Arabia and urge them to immediately allow the flow of humanitarian supplies into Yemen. I have two questions about that. The first is, why isn't the president himself working the phones? And the second is, are there any consequences for Saudi Arabia if they don't immediately allow this flow of goods?
My understanding is the president did bring these up on previous conversations, and that I believe there are actions that are taking place for a port to open, and we'll keep you posted as those details become more available. Major?
On Monday.
Sorry?
Any consequences for Saudi if they don't do this?
As I just said, we have reason to believe that they're moving in that direction for a port to be open. We'll keep you posted. Major?
On Monday, when the president became aware that Michael Flynn lied to the FBI, you referred her to John Dowd. Those of us who've tried, John Dowd is not engaging on that. That's a knowable fact in this building. It's not a legal matter, not for the attorney to say. Can you just tell us when the president became aware of that?
You know, the attorneys feel differently, and they feel this is a question that should be answered by them, and I'll encourage them again to respond to you, but I'm going to have to refer you back to John Dowd again.
Why is it a legal question for them, not about something the president knew and when he knew it?
As I said before, John Decker's the only attorney in here. I'm going to listen to the attorneys on this one, and John Dowd, hopefully, will follow up with you in short order. Mara, sorry, Major, I'm going to keep bouncing because I'm tight on time.
I think you want to take this one. It's real simple. It's very simple. Today, the UN ambassador said it's an open question whether the United States will participate in the Winter Olympics in South Korea. Is it an open question? Is that now in doubt?
Look, that wasn't exactly what the ambassador said. No official decision has been made on that, and we'll keep you guys posted as those decisions are made. Look, I know that the goal is to do so, but that'll be a decision made closer to time. Mara? I think that's an interagency process, but I think ultimately the president would certainly weigh in. But again, that's something that he would take into account, probably a number of the stakeholders that would be involved. Absolutely, if we felt there was an issue, that would come up.
Yeah, I just have two government funding questions. First, does he want S-chip reauthorized?
I haven't had that specific conversation with him, but I do know that we want to fully fund the government. Beyond that, I'm not going to get into any more details before their meeting today.
Okay. The bipartisan leadership is coming up in a much different atmosphere than the last meeting, where he tweeted about how he didn't think a deal was possible because the Democrats were so bad on illegal immigrants pouring over the border. I'm wondering, has the president changed his mind about that? And also specifically, what was he referring to, since in a government shutdown, ICE and the Border Patrol aren't effective?
The president is still very much committed to a strong border and to a border wall, and I would imagine that's discussed at some point today. I think we all hope a deal can be reached. We hope that the Democrats will be willing to put aside partisan politics and focus on fully funding the government. Josh.
On the Hill today, Chris Wray praised the FBI and said it was, the finest law enforcement force in the world. The president said, it's in tatters and it's at its worst place in history. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Look, we don't think that there is a discrepancy. We agree with Chris Wray that FBI field agents are appreciated and respected. The president's issues are with the political leaders in the FBI under former Director Comey, particularly those that played politics with the Hillary Clinton email probe, and we don't see a discrepancy beyond that. Blake?
When he undermines...
Sorry, I'm going to hop around because we're tight on time.
He undermines the FBI and says it's in tatters. So what else fear that, that could create ramifications, that people won't trust law enforcement, that people will say,
no, and again,
why should we interact with the FBI when it's in tatters?
No, and again, the president's referring to the political leaders at the FBI, particularly those that were involved in the Hillary Clinton probe. Blake?
Sarah, thank you. Two quick ones about government
shutdown. Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor said today of the president, his party controls the Senate, the House, and the presidency, speaking of Republicans rather, and he said a shutdown would fall on his shoulders. How is that not just a reflection, an accurate reflection of the political realities that Republicans control Washington at this point?
Look, they may control Washington, but this still takes some Democrats to be engaged in the process, and we hope, frankly, that Democrats will play by the Schumer rule and not hold this bill hostage by playing partisan politics, and that they'll come to the table, help fund our defense department, help fund our military, help fund Veterans Affairs. John?
Clean CR. At some point, though, DACA is going to have to be brought up, or potentially be brought up. Is the White House willing to mix at one point a DACA fix with government spending, and if so, when would that be the case?
The president said that with DACA, he wants to make sure that we have responsible immigration reform, including a border wall and other things that we've laid out in those priorities and those principles, and that's something that would have to be part of that discussion. John?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. From that podium, Secretary Mnuchin and Gary Cohn both assured us that when a final tax reform bill is passed, the alternate minimum tax would disappear immediately. Now, of course, recent statements by the president, as the conference is about to begin, indicate it might not completely disappear, and if not immediately, certainly. Is the administration still committed to ending the AMT right away?
Look, I don't think our position has changed on that front at all, but at the same time, look, the conferees were just named. We want to let this thing work through its process. We've laid out our principles. We're very committed to those and making sure that the bill and the final piece of legislation delivers on that. Charlie?
A lot of attention on sexual misconduct and harassment by members of Congress. Is the president confident that Congress and its leaders can police and investigate themselves on this issue?
I think that we have no reason at this point to see otherwise, and hopefully that process will move forward. Hallie?
Yes, Sarah, I have one question, but I need to clarify something that you had said from the podium here on taxes. You said, I think to Matt on Tuesday, that as long as his taxes are under audit, he's not going to release them. His 2016 taxes, to our knowledge, are not under audit, unless they are. Can you
my understanding, and I will double check, but the president's taxes, no matter who the president is, actually immediately go under audit after being filed. So that's actually inaccurate.
Back to us
but
on
I'll
that?
double check to be 100%
So my question to you
sure.
more broadly is on this moment that we find ourselves in, frankly, of a national reckoning when it comes to sexual harassment. And so, again, a broad 30,000-foot way, does the president believe that he has a credible role in leading this conversation? And can you speak to the specific steps this White House has taken to make sure the women who work here feel like they are in a comfortable environment to talk about these things?
I think that the president treats, certainly as a woman myself, I've never felt anything but treated with the highest level of respect and been empowered to do my job. And I think that that's what I've seen the president do day in and day out since we've been here and during the campaign. And so I think that's a pretty good start and a pretty good example on that front.
Places are having sessions, they're having seminars. Are you guys doing that here? Are you talking about, in recent days, what people in this work environment can do? Are you taking
There are certainly White House policies that we are reminded of, and I think all of us expect each person to live up and to meet those policies and to not cross a line that is not only not legal, but not appropriate or not ethical. Kristen.
Just to follow up, we've seen Democrats forcefully call for John Conyers' resignation, Al Franken's resignation, which happened today. Do Republicans and does this president risk losing their moral authority on this issue, which is a huge issue right now, by endorsing a candidate like Roy Moore, which has now been backed by the RNC as well?
Look, I've addressed this in depth. We think that the allegations are troubling and that ultimately this is something that the people of Alabama should decide. Steve?
Why not call for him to drop out of the race or a writing candidate?
Steve.
Was the president failing to lead at this
Hey, Kristen, I'm going to move around here.
But just a quick follow. Is he failing
Was
to
the
lead on this
president's
issue?
proclamation on Jerusalem delayed because of concerns expressed by the Secretaries of Defense and State about security, that they wanted to get adequate security in place for U.S. embassies around the world?
We wanted to make sure that we had a thoughtful and responsible process, and that the decision and the components of that decision went through the full interagency process. And once that was completed, the president moved forward and took action.